eastern edge of Europe lies a country of vast fertile plains, ancient cities, and a long history filled with both glory and tragedy. Ukraine's people have held on to their national identity and rich cultural traditions in spite of centuries of persecution and foreign domination. Ukraine is a land of contrasts, rational and mystic, adaptable and enduring, ancient and modern. Ukraine spreads over 233,000 square miles, after Russia, the largest country in Europe. Larger than France, Germany, or Spain. More than 52 million people live in this vast country. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1992, Ukraine's neighbors are Moldova, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Belarus, and Russia. Kiev is the capital of Ukraine. Kiev lies on the Dnieper River at the crossroads of ancient trade routes. Many historical monuments are the testimony of Kiev's long and glorious past. The statue of Prince Vladimir is one of the dominant features of the Kievan skyline. Vladimir was a 10th century ruler of Kievan Rus, a loose federation of peoples, the origin of the modern nation of Ukraine. But perhaps more importantly, Prince Vladimir is remembered as a saint, the man who brought Christianity to Ukraine. The Golden Gate dates back to Prince Vladimir's son, Yaroslav the Wise. It was once the main entrance into Kiev. But over the centuries, the city grew beyond it, and the gate slid into ruin. It was recently restored, and now is meticulously cared for. Another central figure in Ukraine's history was the Cossack hetman Bohdan Khmelnytsky. In the 17th century, Khmelnytsky managed to unite the stubbornly independent peoples of Ukraine and free the nation of foreign domination. But later, threatened by powerful enemies on all sides, Khmelnytsky signed a treaty with the Russian Tsar. However, instead of protecting Ukraine, Russia used the treaty as a pretext for taking over the country. In 1982, the Soviet rulers built this so-called reunification monument, trying to convince Ukrainians they hadn't lost independence, but that they had only been rejoined to Mother Russia. Today, ironically, free enterprise flourishes at the foot of this symbol of communist control. Students at Kiev Music Conservatory earn extra cash by playing Western tunes at the base of the monument during their summer holidays. Under Soviet rule, such a thing would have been illegal. Communism began to assert itself at the end of the First World War. During the war, Tsarist Russia had begun to disintegrate, and the Bolshevik Revolution completed the process. Ukraine, taking advantage of the chaos, declared its independence, but it wouldn't stay free for long. The new republic was soon torn apart by warring factions, and eventually it fell to the Bolsheviks. Western democracies were too confused, distant, and slow to respond. On paper, Ukraine was still an independent nation. In fact, it had become a Soviet colony. Communist rule was devastating for Ukraine. Ukraine's peasants resisted Soviet domination and collectivization of the land. To subdue them, Stalin engineered a famine. He forced Ukraine to send so much of its grain to Russia that the country didn't have enough to feed its own people. 4 million Ukrainians starved to death in 2 short years. But the desire for freedom did not die. On August 24, 1991, Ukraine declared its independence. Leonid Makarovich Kravchuk was sworn in as the first president. New Year 1992 was special for Ukrainians. Children came from all corners of Ukraine to take part in this performance. After years of isolation, Ukraine's borders were finally unsealed, and travelers from all over the world could now come and go freely. With independence, efforts are being made to preserve the country's cultural and historical heritage. The recently restored Cathedral of St. Sophia is one of Ukraine's most important historical and cultural treasures. Prince Yaroslav the Wise laid the foundations for the many-domed, five-naved cathedral in the early 11th century. St. Sophia was the chief church of Kievan-Rus and the center of Ukraine's religious, political, and cultural life for 900 years. The interior of the cathedral has been almost unchanged throughout all this time. The mosaics still glow as richly as they did on the day they were completed. The artists who created these images used a palette of 177 colors, including no less than 25 shades of gold. While Ukraine's winters are considered mild for Europe, they can get quite cold with plenty of snow. But Ukrainians aren't the kind of people to let the winter keep them inside. Summer or winter, there are always fishermen on the Dnieper. The winter catch is usually small, if anything is caught at all. Ice fishing is done for pleasure, not to put food on the table. Looking towards Kiev from afar, the first shapes one can make out on the skyline are the cupolas of Pechersk Monastery. According to the old chronicles, the monastery was begun in 1051. It is the oldest in the country.
In the old stories of our church, it is told that the Apostle Andrew came to this place and said, "On these hills God should be praised, and it will prosper." The Apostle's prophecy came true 1,000 years later, when St. Anthony came to these empty hills. It was a wild and uninhabited place when he started digging the caves. Through prayer and fasting, he strengthened these dark places so that they light the entire land.
There is more than a mile of tunnels at Pechersk Monastery in two extensive systems. They are 15 to 33 feet deep, dug into limestone that keeps humidity low and maintains the temperature at a constant 50 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, winter and summer. Monks come here to fast, pray, and sing. Some just for a few hours or a few days, but some come for years. Here there is no day or night, nothing to mark the smooth flow of time. All distractions, all sights and sounds are left behind, leaving the monks free to concentrate on prayer and song. The 18th century bell tower at Upper Pechersk Monastery is the highest in Ukraine, 316 feet. Some 5 million bricks were used to build it. The bell tower offers a sweeping view of the monastery and its many churches and other buildings. At the turn of the 18th century, the monastery owned several hundred workshops and factories, 3 towns, 7 settlements, and 120 villages with 56,000 serfs. Since the year 1615, the Pechevsk Monastery has also had its own print shop. The books published here were influential in promoting education, science, and culture among the people. They were popular because most of them were written in a language that was close to spoken Ukrainian. Ukrainians are avid readers. More books are read here per capita than in most other countries in the world. The Square of Independence is the crossroads and center of modern Kiev. It is more than just a way stop, a place to change from one subway line or trolley to another. It is a place where the pulse and the mood of the city can be felt, where people come to rest and get ready for the day's work. A place to rendezvous and exchange opinions about current affairs. Cutting right through the Square of Independence is the widest and one of the busiest streets of Kiev, Khreshchatyk. The unusually broad sidewalks along Khreshchatyk make it one of the people's favorite places to take a leisurely stroll. Most of the buildings along Khreshchatyk were destroyed during World War II. They were rebuilt when communism was at its strongest. At that time, all artwork had to show how happy the working class supposedly was under Soviet communist rule. Buildings were elaborately decorated with ornamentation and sculpture, including statues of architects, farmers, welders, and other workers, posed as they gazed theatrically at the bright future ahead of them. Officially, the style was called Socialist Realism. Unofficially, it was nicknamed Socialist Baroque. An older counterpart to modern Khreshchatyk is the street called Andrew's Spusk that begins at St. Andrew's Church. This is where fashionable Kievans come to see and show off the latest trends and fads. It is also a place where newlyweds come for their wedding photographs. A mixture of history and legend, it is said that this house was designed by an architect grieving over the death of his daughter who had drowned. This is supposed to be why he was so obsessed with statues of water creatures like frogs and mermaids. The more prosaic explanation is that since it was built for an owner of a cement factory, the facade of the house was a sort of advertisement for the artistic possibilities of cement. Even the university building has its story. Since the early 19th century, the university had been known for its freedom of thought and democratic leanings. In the late 19th century, Tsar Nicholas II ordered it to be painted red as a punishment for rebelliousness. This was meant to work much like the order to wear scarlet letter. But it didn't work. Red University, as it was nicknamed, continued to thrive. Some graduates from this and other Kiev universities went on to world fame, like Sikorsky, who built helicopters in the United States. Other graduates went on to Antonov Design Bureau. Some of the most advanced airplanes of the former Soviet Union were designed and tested in Antonov's wind tunnels. Some of the design areas still look somewhat old-fashioned, but appearances can be deceiving. The Antonov Design Bureau is on the cutting edge of world airplane design and manufacture. The biggest airplane in the world was built here at Antonov. It has carried the Soviet space shuttle Buran and many other cargoes that are too big for ordinary planes but need to get somewhere fast. Traditionally, summer is the time of rest for the workers of Kiev. Many leave the city for summer camps in the countryside. Typically, workers get 3 to 4 weeks of paid holiday every year, and most of them take the time out in the summer. Summer camps always included so-called cultural programs, usually movies or music performances. The choir group Rodin is made up of the most talented amateur singers from many Kiev factories. The performers are paid little or nothing. Their real reward is the joy of meeting and singing together with friends. Farmers are the one group of workers who don't get to rest in the summer. And likewise, the workers at the Mironovka Agricultural Research Institute, not far from Kiev. The institute is famous for developing new strains of grain. Samples of wheat are collected from small numbered plots and then tested and used in experiments to produce improved strains. Some of the grain is used for cloning. In this laboratory, pollen is removed from ears of grain and cloned in special solutions to form complete plants, roots, stems, leaves, and all. The process may seem time-consuming, but in reality it saves years of experimentation in the fields, and many strains of wheat developed in these labs could not be grown in any other way. Just a few miles away lies a place very dear to Ukrainians. Every morning the grounds are swept and even the spider webs are removed from the shrubs on Kanyev Hill, the resting place of the most beloved of Ukrainian sons, poet, writer, and painter Taras Shevchenko. In 1814, Shevchenko was born into a serf family in the nearby village. His chances of rising above the fate of his parents were extremely poor. Yet, his extraordinary talent and determination carried him well beyond the horizon of his contemporaries. At the age of 22, Shevchenko was discovered by fellow artists. Impressed by his rare talent, they gathered money and bought his freedom from serfdom. Within a few years, Shevchenko had become one of Ukraine's most famous painters and poets. 150 miles north of Kiev lies Chernihiv. Founded in the 7th century, the city is rich in medieval architecture. Chernihiv is also famous for its embroidery and for making the uniquely Ukrainian musical instrument called the bandura. To celebrate the 1300th anniversary of its founding, much of Chernihiv is being repaired and restored, especially around historical sites. In most places, workers use the same careful hand methods as in the original construction. Chernihiv has so many churches, it seems there is an onion-domed cupola no matter which way one looks. Most churches here are at least 700 to 800 years old. Their domes are said to be covered with enough gold to make a wedding ring for everyone in Chernihiv. The oldest of Chernihiv's churches is the Cathedral of Our Savior, founded in the 11th century. Next to it stands a school from the 17th century. Amazingly for its time, the lower classes were not excluded from this school, and the children of poor Cossack and burgher families were admitted along with the children of the rich and noble. Literacy is universal in Ukraine today. All children can read and write by the age of 10. The Chernihiv region has long been famous for folk arts and crafts. Under the Soviet regime, the best artisans were employed at state-run workshops and factories like this one, which specializes in embroidery. Most of the work is done by machines now, but some of the more intricate parts are still made by hand. One of the most talented embroiderers in Chernihiv is Yevdokia Yevtushenko.
Я работаю 33 года.
I have been working here for 33 years. I do embroidery, make drawings, and train the workers in various techniques. I also check the quality of the finished work.
Технику вышивки рабочим на участке. Чтобы создать рисунок,
Our designs are based on national traditions. We go to museums, to the villages, and we look at the old patterns here. From all this, we create our own designs, adapted for both the modern clothing and folk costumes. Once there was a set of women's and a man's shirt that I worked on for about 10 years. We don't have it here anymore. It was a very fine work, a lot of counting, a lot of detail. Usually I work on a piece only for a month or two, sometimes 3.
While there are many places in Ukraine where beautiful embroidery is made, there is only one place where the uniquely Ukrainian bandura is produced on a large scale. Over 30,000 of them have been made in this Chernihiv factory since assembly line production was introduced in 1952. Besides mass-produced instruments, custom-made banduras are also created here. Each one is painstakingly built by hand and decorated with inlaid designs of exotic woods. One master instrument maker can make only about 20 banduras a year. The modern bandura has 55 strings. Of these, 12 are bass strings. The range covers 4½ octaves. Traditionally, the bandura has been played by blind, wandering musician storytellers who sang of historic events and legends. Even today, many bandura players are blind. Pavlo Stepanovich Surpun continues this long tradition today. In this ballad, he tells the story of the famous Cossack and fighter against Tatars, Morozenko. The city of Dnepropetrovsk was founded by Catherine II in 1784. It is one of several industrial cities in the Ukraine heartland. Under communist rule, Dnepropetrovsk was closed and nobody was allowed to come or depart without permission. The official reason was to protect sensitive industries, but really, it was just one more way to control the people. The city was finally opened to foreigners in 1990. The center of activity is near the shopping mall, or the Universal Store as it's called here. Fast food, Ukrainian style, is sold here in the form of piroshki, bread rolls baked with a filling of meat, eggs, or jam. The fountain helps cool things off on hot summer days. For those who want to leave the hot summer city altogether, there is an easy escape. A cable line shuttles people between downtown and the sandy beaches on a nearby island in the Dnieper River. Just 48 miles down the river is the Dnieper's largest island, Khortytsa. It is also historically the most important of the river's islands. Here in the 15th century, runaway serfs formed the first and most famous Cossack community, Zaporozhian Sich, literally the clearing beyond the rapids. Now a museum on the island is dedicated to the Cossacks, and scenes from Cossack history are favorite subjects for movies and novels. Treacherous waters and steep banks once protected the island from attackers. Now only the high banks are left. The view from Khortytsa is not of rapids, but of one of the largest hydroelectric dams in Europe. In the early 18th century, Hetman Ivan Mazepa led the Cossacks in an ill-fated uprising against Russian Tsar Peter the Great. At stake was nothing less than Ukrainian independence. To improve his chances, Ivan Mazepa enlisted help from Swedish King Charles XII. The battle that would decide the destiny of Ukraine for the next 2 centuries was fought in this field near the town of Poltava. Ivan Mazepa and Charles XII were defeated. The positions of the victorious Russian forces are still marked with simple columns. To commemorate Peter's victory, a church was built nearby and a cross erected on the grave of the 13,445 Russian soldiers who died in the battle. A more modest monument was also erected to the Swedish soldiers. The victors get to write the history, and so conspicuously missing is any monument to the Ukrainian Cossacks who also died here. Maybe this new monument to the Cossacks will help make up for the historical imbalance. It marks the 500th year since the first appearance of Cossacks in the old chronicles. In the world outside Ukraine, the Cossacks are mostly thought of as villains. Inside Ukraine, they are mostly remembered for the good things they did. After proper official ceremonies, the celebration can begin. Folk groups from all over Ukraine sing and perform dances from their native regions. Cossacks did more than fight and dance. They also financed the building of many churches. The last church founded by the Zaporozhian Cossacks was the Collegiate Church of the Holy Trinity in Novomoskovsk, built out of wood floated down the Dnieper River. It is the largest timber structure of the 18th century in all of Europe. Here, timber architecture and building techniques reached their pinnacle.
Our church was built without a single nail. It has been standing now for 219 years, and we can still enjoy its beauty. The other large wooden churches in the area have not been preserved. This one is the pride of our famous Ukrainian Cossacks.
The Collegiate Church has a special meaning for people in this region. They travel long distances to come here to celebrate all the special events in the cycle of their lives. Newborns are baptized here and young couples married. Bread, fruit, and even candy are brought for the wakes. And soil is brought to be blessed and sprinkled on graves. The Cossacks brought many fine churches and other developments to the region. But perhaps their most important achievement was holding off the bondage of serfdom, an unrelenting toil that amounted to slavery. Because of the Cossacks, some villages escaped serfdom almost entirely. As a result, people had time to practice and develop their traditional arts and crafts. Outstanding examples of these can be found in a small local gallery and workshops in the village of Petrikovka. The mastermind behind the gallery and the workshop is Fyodor Pankov. Petrikovka paintings have long been used to help storytellers pass on legends and oral history. Each part of a painting design is a reminder of one element of a story to help the storyteller remember it correctly. The legend of Petrikovka, Sour Cherry, at this gallery is a fine example.
In the old days, Cossacks lived in Petrikovka. If they didn't want to get married, they went to the monastery. The married ones stayed in their own homes. Here on this house is only one stork. People know storks like to get married, so one stork means here lives a lonely Cossack without a wife. The yellow color means that it is the autumn of his life and he is getting old. But he has one big hope, his daughter. She is young, and that's why she is painted in green. There is also a handsome young man. All of Petrikovka loves this couple. They are engaged to get married, but they never live to see this happy day. Crimeans raid the village and burn it. You can see the fire burning these houses. The people of the village bury the couple next to each other, so at least they could be together in the next world. A sour cherry tree is planted on their grave. It bears such delicious fruit that people come from far away to eat it and take home seeds to plant. That cherry tree is still alive in our village.
The southernmost part of Ukraine includes the most recent addition to the nation, the Crimean Peninsula. It was made a part of Ukraine in 1954. The largest city in this part of Ukraine is Odessa. Odessa is a harbor city. Its peaceful atmosphere seems to come from the calm rhythm of the ships that come and go in the port. Odessa is a beautiful city by any standards. 1 out of every 3 citizens makes a living from the port or the Black Sea. More people of non-Ukrainian nationality live here than in any other city of Ukraine. Odessa flourished best in the time of the Duc de Richelieu, who had fled here from the French Revolution. Under his rule, the city reached its economic and cultural peak. Richelieu's statue stands atop the Potemkin Steps. The steps are named after an Imperial Russian battleship whose crew mutinied in 1905 and was massacred on these very steps. Or at least that is the way it was portrayed in the classic film Battleship Potemkin by Soviet director Sergei Eisenstein. The 192 steps were designed in such a way that it is mostly landings that one can see from above. It makes the steps appear shorter. Looking from below, on the other hand, landings are hidden. Life tends to run at an easy pace in Odessa. There are plenty of parks and shady promenades, and it seems people have plenty of time to enjoy them. From Odessa, it is just a short trip to the Crimea, vacation paradise of the former Soviet Union. It is easy to see why heads of Imperial and later Soviet Russia had their vacation villas here. The main attractions of Crimea are the warm waters of the Black Sea and an abundance of sun. For those who can't afford villas of their own, there are plenty of hotels. Yalta is the largest of the Crimean coastal resorts. The town was founded by the Byzantines well over a millennium ago. Its climate resembles the Mediterranean, protected from cold winds by the mountains on 3 sides, but cooled by gentle sea breezes in summer. Yalta is known historically for the Yalta Conference held at the end of the Second World War. The conference took place outside of Yalta in a former summer residence of Tsar Nicholas II, Livadia Palace. Here, in February of 1945, the heads of Britain, the United States, and the USSR came together to decide the post-war fate of Europe. At this conference, Ukraine was allotted its own seat in the United Nations. Its coastline isn't Crimea's only attraction. The interior of the Crimean Peninsula is just as rich in treasures, both natural and man-made. Only 2 hours by car from Yalta is the ancient capital and seat of the Tatar Khan's Bakhchisarai, Palace of Gardens in Tatar. Tatars had been living on the Crimean Peninsula for centuries before the Ukrainians and the Russians arrived. Khan Abdul Sahal Girey built this palace in 1519. He and his family are buried in the cemetery within the palace walls.
أشهد أن محمد رسول الله.
Today, the palace is headquarters of the Historical and Archaeological Museum, responsible not only for the palace, but also for 14 cave cities in the region. Just 2 miles from here, carved into the rock, is the Dormition Cave Monastery, an outpost of Christianity since the 8th century. Those who walked up these steps usually did not walk out to rejoin the profane world again. They stayed in the monastery even as the control over the territory by the Muslims raised and ebbed. For some, the rock in which they lived became their permanent resting place as well. Entire chapels and churches, complete with columns and frescoes, were chipped out of solid rock. Western Ukraine reaches all the way to the Carpathian Mountains. The spiritual center of the region is Lviv. Between Lviv and Kiev stretches gently undulating countryside, the kind of rich farmland that made it such a temptation to every neighboring country. The region is dotted with castles from the Middle Ages, such as Castle Olesko from the 14th century. Many nations owned this castle before it came to rest firmly in Ukrainian hands. Lithuanians, Poles, Russians, Austrians, and even Tatars were all masters here at one time or another. The farmland around Olesko is just as rich as it is almost everywhere in Ukraine. Roman Mikhailovich Kuch has lived here all his life.
We had a good harvest this year. Barley is giving 4,500 pounds per acre. Wheat, 3,700 pounds per acre. Our soil is very good. However, this year we had a stormy spring. We had winds, hail. The hail flattened the wheat, so it's hard to harvest. But I think we will still do pretty well, so the people of Ukraine won't have to go begging. Storks walk behind the harvester to catch frogs and mice. Storks nest on nearly every other house in the village. Every year they return to their nests, then have their young. Soon, after the 22nd of August, they will start leaving.
Along its western border, Ukraine rises into the Carpathian Mountains. Even today, large parts of the Carpathians are isolated, remote from the modern world both in space and time. Compared with the rest of Ukraine, fields here tend to be small, and there is more pasture land for grazing sheep and cows. Industry has not made much of a mark. People's lives are much like they were generations ago. The region of western Ukraine has long been the repository of the oldest of Ukrainian customs and traditions. Perhaps the most famous of these is the tradition of painting the Easter eggs, or pisanki as they're called in Ukrainian. The word pisanki comes from the word to write, In fact, people in Ukraine say they write an Easter egg. Lesa Priveda is one of Ukraine's leading pisanki artists.
Приблизно пишу в рік 500-600.
I make about 500 to 600 eggs a year. I do pisanki because I am an artist and a painter, and I study folk art. Also, perhaps, because of something that happened when I was very small. I don't remember how old, maybe 3, maybe 4. In our tradition, the priest blesses the pisanki at Easter time. Then we display them on a big plate. When I was small, I was fascinated by the plate of pisanki. I could not resist them. So once I got a little stool so I could reach the plate. I pulled it towards myself and it fell to the floor. All the eggs were smashed. Then, when I was 5 or 6, I started trying to write the eggs myself. I wanted to recreate those pisanki because I remembered how beautiful they had been and how I broke them. Then later I started to do it more seriously, and this is what it all led to. This is a contemporary ornament. Here I use the elements of traditional ornament, but the divisions on the egg are unconventional. Traditional pisanki are not composed like this. And a bird of stone flew in. This design was inspired by the poetry of Stefan Popilak, a poet who was imprisoned at the age of 22. This is autumn, spring, summer, winter.
The cultural and political capital of Western Ukraine is Lviv. If Kiev is the brain of Ukraine, Lviv is the country's heart. Lviv was founded in the mid-13th century by Prince Daniel of Galicia. The city was named after his son, Leo, Lviv in Ukrainian. To see the intimate side of Lviv, it is best to start early in the morning, soon after the streets have been washed, but before the puddles have dried. When the night prowlers are on their way home, and the day people are beginning to wake up. The ancient houses of merchants in Market Square are at their best in the light of the early sun, low on the horizon. Lviv also means lion in Ukrainian, and the lion has been the symbol of the city for a very long time now. Statues of lions are found everywhere, in all shapes and all sizes, and in all places and positions. Lviv is a city with a distinctly Western European flavor. Even the streetcar rails are the narrow Western European standard instead of the wide gauge of the rest of the former Soviet Union. Most people don't have private cars in Lviv, and if they did have cars, there'd be no place to park them in the narrow streets. Luckily, public transportation goes everywhere, especially streetcars. Riding one of them is a good way to get a sense of the city. Most of the streetcar drivers are women. According to local wisdom, women are better drivers than men because they are less likely to get into races with cars. In spite of the isolation during the communist times, Lviv survives as a multilingual city. Most inhabitants of Lviv speak at least one or two languages on top of their native Ukrainian. Trade is beginning to pick up, and there is more produce from varied sources at the local produce market. The supply of fresh foods in the market varies with the seasons, but fresh flowers are plentiful any time of the year. Near the original marketplace is a church devoted to the patron saint of trade, the Orthodox Christian Church of St. Paraskeva. The foundations of the church date back to the 13th century. Inside stands one of the most precious ikonostasis, or altar walls, in Ukraine. It is made up of 70 icons painted by the Lviv masters of the 16th and 17th centuries. Most of the icons are devoted to Jesus Christ and scenes from his life. A prominent place is also given to the icon of St. Paraskeva. A row of smaller icons shows her suffering before she was beheaded. In the winter, under a blanket of snow, Lviv seems even older than it really is. The modern sounds of the city are muffled, and the occasional sounds of nature can be heard just a little better. Here, as everywhere, children are delighted by the first snow. And while sleds might be in short supply, where there is a will, there is a way. Sledding on milk crates is better than not sledding at all. Even a pair of good shoes will do when necessary. In Kiev, St. Vladimir's Cathedral is the central site of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Bells ring in anticipation of the arrival of the Metropolitan, who is the chief bishop of the church. Vasily and his helper play a melody that has been the same since the bells were first hung in this tower. The wind is much colder here than down below. The makeshift sheet metal booth was built to make conditions more tolerable for the bell ringers. While the bells ring above St. Vladimir's, in the basement, the sacramental breads are being baked. Several kinds of leavened breads and buns made here are used in many ceremonies in the church, including the bread that is mixed with red wine into a kind of paste and used as the host during communion. No sugar nor fat is used, and the dough is blessed at every step of the process to ensure a successful baking. The Orthodox Church adheres strictly to the beliefs, practices, and traditions that have been handed down through long centuries. The Church believes that sacred truths are eternal and need no changes to keep up with modern times. On special occasions such as Christmas, the Metropolitan comes to lead the services personally. In the Orthodox Church, a Christmas vigil service is held early on Christmas Eve. It lasts until sundown. Then the Christmas service itself is held. The 5 loaves of bread, wine, and oil are blessed in a holdover from the time when the vigil service lasted many hours longer. People stood on their feet the whole time, so to give them strength, they were given bits of the blessed bread which had been soaked in wine. The rules of the Orthodox Church forbid the use of any musical instrument in the church except the human voice. This puts heavy demands on the choir, since it must supply all the music for church services. During the Christmas service, special attention is given to St. Vladimir, a 9th century prince who was elevated to sainthood and is still venerated as the man who brought Christianity to Ukraine. For many years, under the communist rule, religion was suppressed. The more outspoken priests and followers were jailed and exiled. It is a testimony to the depth of the religious feeling in Ukraine that the churches today are just as full as they were before the religious persecution started. After centuries of occupation and domination by foreign powers, Ukraine is independent at last. 1,000 years after Prince Vladimir, 300 years after Bohdan Khmelnytsky, and after 7 decades of communist rule, the richness of Ukraine belongs at last to its own people.
If you think Lufthansa's standards are high in the air, you should see us on the ground. It begins with one of the youngest fleets in the air, some of the most experienced ground crews on Earth, and a precise system of checks and double checks. At Lufthansa, even the shortest of journeys begins with these vital steps. Because if your flight isn't perfect, it never leaves the ground. Lufthansa, a passion for perfection.
International Video Network brings you the greatest adventures in video entertainment. Award-winning documentaries from Reader's Digest, exploring the masterworks of man and nature. Travel planning videos from Fodors, revealing looks at the people, places, and cultures of the world. Rand McNally Video Expeditions, taking you to some of the most remote and dangerous places on Earth. Rand McNally Video Travelers, whirlwind tours you can enjoy from the comfort of your living room. Super Cities, celebrating the best-loved cities of the world. And Video Visits, whisking you away to exotic, romantic, and popular destinations. International Video Network. Great adventures in video. See your local video retailer or call International Video Network at 1-800-669-4486, extension 850 for your free catalog, featuring more than 250 travel, documentary, and special interest videos.